Hello friends and happy Capesmas! Today I'm going to be walking you through some of the more luxury details that you can do to a cape. So what do I mean by luxury details though? Let's talk about that. I already put some more higher end or luxurious details in the embellishments video, such as the lace trimmed hems and the ribbon work that I did. But now we're going to be talking about some more things that you can do. Firstly, I want to talk about the hem. Now, all of the hems that I did were machined. As you can see, this one here is machined, and I'm going to eventually be dyeing this one black, but you can see the black stitching pretty clearly. And on a lot of the other capes that I did, the top stitching was pretty visible. So one way that you can do a hem that would be very luxurious and wonderful would be to hand sew it. And I will link down below a tutorial for hand sewing a hem. But what I wound up doing, just so that I would get this ginormous hem done in time for the video reveal footage that I needed, is I did an invisible hem stitch, which is, as you can see, basically invisible from the outside, even though I used black thread on this white or gray fabric. But on the inside, you can see all these little spiky boys. So let's jump into the tutorial for that real quick.
To start with, you're going to want to prep your hem. Fold it over as you would any other hem, but after pressing, fold it backwards and pin it along the new fold that you've just created so that you can stitch on just the underside of the hem, except for whenever the invisible catch stitch goes over and grabs just the tiniest bit of that fold. This is what attaches the folded section of the hem to the self of the garment that you're hemming. It's basically no different than sliding your needle under the folded edge of your hem and then grabbing a couple of threads with your needle before continuing. And if you use a matching thread, it's basically invisible.
Honestly, sewing machines are nothing to be ashamed of using or afraid of using. It's just a matter of going slowly and taking your time and not getting distracted mid-stitch, which I'm very guilty of doing. They can really be a fantastic tool if you know what you're doing. I see a lot of people in the sewing community saying that certain things can't be done on a sewing machine or they're too afraid to even try, and it makes me sad because you can really get a lot more done with industrialization. Now, another feature of this hood that is a luxury detail is this little loop right here. And I'm about to show you how to sew that on and then show you how to use it, because it is fantastically useful.
Select a satin ribbon for yourself, one that is strong and sturdy, and fold under the raw edges, or burn them if you prefer to do that instead. Pin it down to your hood about an inch away from the hem along the center seam. And then what you're going to do is whip stitch it in place with the teensiest, tiniest stitches so that they're invisible from the outside, but your ribbon is securely held down.
Now, as you can see here, I've got this big hair clip. You'll probably want to use bobby pins or something more subtle. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to thread it through this loop and clip it down. And now this hood is going nowhere. And speaking of reinforcing things, for a nice sturdy cape, one thing that you're going to want to do is treat the seams. Now, one way to do that is to just simply zigzag over them, or you can hand fell them. French seams aren't really going to work on a cape like this. You can maybe do a French seam on the front panel, but for the gores, Frenching is going to be a little bit of a pain. I personally find French seams on a corner to be the most frustrating thing in the entire world, but if you want to do it, more power to you, honestly.
Hand felling is really not that hard. You're just going to grab one or two little threads and then come along the back side of your seam allowance and roll back over to grab 2 or 3 more threads. Once you get a rhythm going, it's really kind of nice. Very similar to a hem stitch, actually. For a cape that has gores, I would highly recommend doing a fell stitch along the seam allowances of the gore because that'll help reinforce this corner section. See, as the fabric and the weight of the fabric is tugging on that main corner there, it's going to distribute the force and the weight just a little bit and help it wear longer.
Another way that you can finish your seams is with seam binding or a Hong Kong binding. And I'm going to show you how I did that finishing on the inside of my cape, as well as used some ribbon to add a little hanging loop so that I could hang it on a hook.
For a typical Hong Kong binding, what you would actually do is sandwich your seam allowance with your ribbon or your bias tape or whatever it is that you're using. But what I've opted to do instead is very similar to what you see on corsets to reinforce this seam. So I am just felling it down to each side of the ribbon on either side of the seam allowance, and this is going to add just a little bit of strength. Also, I don't have to worry about finding a ribbon that is thick enough to sandwich my seam allowances with, because this fabric was very hefty and had very thick, chunky seam allowances. But I still get a very nice, elegant, finished looking final product. When going back over the seam allowance side, you don't have to worry quite as much about having teensy tiny little stitches, and it goes a lot faster. But before I stitch all of this ribbon down, there's one thing that I want to do first, and that is add a nice hefty little loop. I can hang this loop on little hooks or on hangers whenever I'm storing my cape. And so what I'm going to do is just do a back stitch to attach it to the seam allowance, deep enough in that it's not going to pull out from the raw edges of the fabric. And you want to back stitch it in or machine stitch it in first, so that it will have a nice sturdy line of stitching to hold it in place before you do the decorative satin binding on top of that, because that'll not be anywhere near as strong as your back stitching or machine stitching would be. And it is going to be bearing a lot of weight whenever you hang your cape.
And now you have some luxurious cape details that you can add to any cape pattern, whether it's one of the free ones that I have hosted on my Ko-fi, or one that you've drafted yourself or found somewhere else. And speaking of my Ko-fi, I have a goal currently to break even on my Ko-fi for all of the supplies that I have bought and needed since the beginning of my YouTube journey and all the way until February. And once I meet that goal, I'm going to release a free sewing pattern, possibly 2, but probably just the 1. Which I know I just launched like 4 free sewing patterns, but I will be launching another one because it's my favorite thing to do and I don't know how to stop. Speaking of February, I also have another sewing pattern that will be hopefully launching around then, so stay tuned for that one. There's a whole slew of patterns that I'm working on and they're all chaotically customizable, so I'll work on the idea for it and then it'll split out into like 4 or 5 patterns, and then I'll have to try to narrow down like, okay, what do people actually want? What's the priority to get out first? And I'm kind of going in order of skill level a little bit, and I'm launching ones that are very easy to sew first. But I do have a lot in the works that I'm very excited to share with you all. Anyways, I have been Maya Grace. This has been a luxurious cape tutorial, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Happy Capesmas, happy Christmas, happy Yule, happy late Hanukkah. Hanukkah already came and went. I don't actually know when Kwanzaa is, but if you celebrate Kwanzaa, have a happy one. Oh, I am way off topic now. Bye, friends! Are there any other holidays that happen around now that I should know about? There's winter solstice. I don't exactly know when the solstice is or was, though. I'm terrible at timelines. I'm trying to think. I feel like there's another one that I am forgetting. I wonder if the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster has a winter holiday. I'm sure that they do, like a noodle bash of some kind. Bloop, bloop, bloop.